Hello. Thank you for joining us today. The Our Driving Concern Employer Traffic Safety Program is pleased to offer an occasional driving safety program webinar this morning. I want to welcome our presenter this morning, Karen Puckett. Karen Puckett is the Director of Workplace Safety with the Texas Division of Workers' Compensation. She is responsible for the state's occupational safety and health functions, including employer consultations and OSHA compliance assistance, insurance company safety regulation, and safety violation investigations. She is responsible for providing workplace safety and health educational materials, training, and outreach activities, as well as the collection of Texas injury and fatality data for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. A few things I want to note before we get started. Everyone is muted, but you do have the ability to type into the chat function during the webinar. All slides will be available and may be attached as a handout. The presenter may answer your question during the presentation or choose to address questions at the end. I believe that Karen will actually address any questions at the very end. If you should encounter any problems or issues, please type a message to the host, and I will address it as needed. The presenter and the Our Driving Concern Program Manager's contact information will be made available in the last slide. There is a very brief post-event survey at the conclusion of the webinar, and as this program is funded through grant dollars and provided at no cost to employers, we would greatly appreciate you giving us your feedback. With that, I welcome Karen Puckett, and we'll turn it over to her to begin.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk about driving safety. The Division of Workers' Compensation is the state agency responsible for promoting safe and healthy workplaces in Texas, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some ideas and some thought-provoking discussion about keeping your employees safe at work. What I'm going to cover today are some reasons why you should consider the roadway as an extension of your workplace, and talk about some of the policies that you should consider putting into place if you have employees who drive on the job. Before I get into this, I'd like for you to think about what you were doing, if you can remember back this far. On November 7th in the year 2000, that was a little over 16 years ago. That's a long time. So just think about what was going on in your life at the time. And the reason this date is important is because it's the last day that nobody died on a crash on a Texas roadway. That's based on data from the Texas Department of Transportation. So we've gone over 16 years where at least one person, and in most cases many people, have died in crashes on our roadways in Texas. And, you know, this is a real concern for employees that are out there driving for you while they're on the job. Here's some more statistics. In 2015, 3,531 people died on Texas roads. You know, tens of thousands of people sustained serious injuries in those crashes that may not have perished. And you can see how many billion vehicle miles that Texans drive on our roadways every day. So there's a lot of exposure to being hurt in a car crash when you're on the road. We are focusing on transportation here at the division and hoping that we can inspire you to do the same, because transportation incidents are the leading cause of work-related fatalities in our state. And there are so many different occupations, types of employees that might be driving either regularly or incidentally when they're on the job and exposed to these types of risks that are out there. And here's where the missing link kind of comes in. Of these of these fatal injuries that are transportation incidents, 75% were roadway crashes. And what's significant about that is OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is the regulator over safety in our state, does not have jurisdiction over roadway crashes. So they're not, you know, while a driver might be cited for violating a traffic law, nobody is really looking at a lot of these incidents or investigating a lot of these incidents from an occupational safety standpoint. And it's something that we may not be thinking about as employers, especially if our employees are not commercial drivers. Maybe they're just driving a personal vehicle or a four-wheel vehicle. So driving and being out on the road is likely one of the most dangerous things that a lot of these types of employees are doing at any given time on the job. Looking at some Bureau of Labor Statistics data, it's a full 45% of the fatalities that are happening on the job in our state are transportation incidents. And here's another missing link, so to speak. Almost half of these people who died were not motor vehicle operators by occupation. In other words, their primary job was something else besides driving a vehicle, and they were involved in a crash that took their life. A little bit more detail just so you can see the gap here. A lot of these other types of events that might cause a fatality that we're, might be more familiar with, contact with an object or equipment, violence, exposure to harmful things, falls, fires or explosions. Certainly too many people are dying from those kinds of events as well, but there's a giant gap between transportation incidents and the next leading cause of fatal injuries. So this is something that is a very real hazard, and something that we hope that you as an employer will be thinking about if you have employees that are on the road. We think it's important for you to take a stand as an employer to have an occupational driving safety program. Just like I hope that you are spending a lot of time and effort on OSHA-required written programs and implementing those in your workplace, like hazard communication and lockout, tagout, emergency planning. There are a variety of required programs that employers have to put in place to safeguard their employees, and we're trying to hopefully encourage employers to think about driving safety as in the same way that they would about any other OSHA-required written program. Driving safety programs are not required, but they're just as important as some of these other hazards and risks that OSHA wants employers to address in their workplace. So we think it's important to, develop a program, develop policies, and enforce those. And just like any other of your written programs, make sure you're reviewing those on a regular basis for, to look for changes or things that you might need to adjust over time when it comes to your policies. We're just going to be talking about policies today, but we think that a written program should include several elements, and we've categorized them into 4 major sections. One, what we're talking about today, which is the roadway workplace. Think of the road as part of your workplace. Think about it just as you would inside your brick and mortar. What do we need to do to safeguard our employees when they're out on vehicles on the road? And then other elements that we'll cover in future webinars, things that affect the driver, things that affect the vehicle, and things in the environment that can affect the trip that your employees are taking. So specifically, we think these types of policies are important. Just like any other written program that you might be familiar with, you certainly want to have management commitment and have a commitment statement in your policy as to what the expectation is for your employees who are driving, and what what management wants them to consider when they're taking on that job duty. Specify the roles and responsibilities, and dictate who's responsible for overseeing the program, who's responsible for training people, who's responsible for putting things into place once you get your program written. And policy statements are important, and some of the policies that we think you should have in place include just a driver policy in general, that you think driving is important part of their job duty, and it's an important aspect that you want them to be safe doing. You should have a policy that dictates who would be qualified to drive for you on the job, and we'll cover that in more detail in the next webinar, what those qualifications may be. You should have a policy on restraint use in vehicles, whether it's a over-the-road vehicle, a piece of heavy equipment, a forklift, whatever the motorized vehicle is, you should have a policy regarding use of seat belts or whatever restraints come from the factory in those types of vehicles. A policy on driving defensively, a policy on distractions in distractions in the vehicle, and what your expectation is in terms of use of electronic devices in the vehicle, prohibiting those and making sure that the employee's paying attention to what they're doing, the actual act of driving instead of other things in the vehicle, and a policy on impaired driving, what your expectations are when it comes to motor vehicle operators and you want them to be fit and able to operate that equipment without being under the impairment of other things such as alcohol or drugs or even prescription medications. I'm trying, oh, there we go, advance the slide here. So your driving safety program should have an element to instruct employees how to report crashes, and we also think it's important for them to report near misses, because just like any other hazard in the workplace or any other incident, you know, the more near misses you have, the more likely that a serious incident is going to occur. So we want you to encourage employees to report all of these types of things, and then have an element in your program about how to investigate it. Who's going to be responsible for investigating? What are the actions that are going to be taken to mitigate the hazards in the future, doing root cause analysis and all that kind of stuff. You don't often see that kind of detail in a crash report that the law enforcement official would be filling out. So you as an employer should really be looking at crashes that occur and trying to determine how and why they occurred, what systemic issue or systemic reason was in place that allowed that to occur. Your program should also include policies on pre- and post-trip vehicle inspections. If you have a fleet, you probably already have something like that in place, but you know, you should also consider personally owned vehicles and the condition of those vehicles that employees are using while they're driving for you on the job. The maintenance and repair, who's responsible for repairing, how does an employee notify you as the employer that something needs to be repaired on a motorized vehicle? How do you take that out of service? Who's going to fix it? How are people notified that it's back in service? That sort of thing. Your program should have a driver training program, and we'll talk about that in a third part of this webinar series, get in more detail about what elements you should be training your drivers on. Your program should have a record-keeping component where you're keeping track of those investigations, keeping track of those vehicle inspections, keeping track of your vehicle maintenance, keeping track of injuries that are occurring, and looking at trends and seeing what kind of things are happening repeatedly and coming up with devising ways to try to prevent those in the future. And as I mentioned earlier, just like any other written program, review it regularly to add or to take away from if there are things that have changed about who's driving for you and what kind of vehicles are driving, or if new types of vehicles are introduced or new types of technology is introduced into the vehicles that they're driving. Another important component to consider is journey management, and this is the process of making a conscious decision about, does this employee really need to drive to accomplish what we need to accomplish for our business? And if they do, let's plan ahead and think about the safest way for them to get where they need to go. You know, what route is the best route to take? What time of day is best? You know, what type of vehicles should they be in? Are there options that one type of vehicle may be better than another? What are the environmental conditions? What's going on with the weather? What's going on with the road conditions? Is there construction going on, and that sort of thing? You can talk with your local law enforcement officials about areas in your community where the most crashes occur, and that might be a way for you to decide, you know, outside of the Walmart, you know, downtown, that's where the most crashes occur in our city, so maybe we should try to plan our routes to where employees don't go to that area. Maybe we can go around that area to avoid those kinds of things. So I do encourage you to think about that. What's the best way for our employees to accomplish what we need them to accomplish if, in fact, they do need to drive for their job. And, you know, in that light, remember the shortest way is not always the fastest or the safest. So sometimes it might be better to take a longer way and avoid congestion, avoid problem areas in your community. And it's also important, you know, if you have employees traveling outside of your local community, to think about what local laws and ordinances are in effect in those areas so that your policies support those and aren't in conflict with them. When we mentioned distracted driving, there are a lot of local jurisdictions that have implemented ordinances regarding use of electronic devices and cell phones and hands-free and that sort of thing while driving. So it's important to know what those regulations are when you're developing your policy, and probably going with the lowest common denominator would be the best approach to do that. There are a lot of places that you can find help to develop your policy and your training programs. If you carry workers' compensation insurance in Texas, your insurance company is required to provide you with accident prevention services to help you prevent injuries and incidents. So you can, on the front of your policy, there should be information as to how to contact them to obtain that type of help. The Texas Department of Transportation has a lot of good information on their website related to driver safety, driver behavior safety, and road conditions, and, you know, highway closures and that sort of thing. National Safety Council also has lots of resources and training material, which a lot of you may well know since you're on this webinar, but please do take advantage of the information that they have out there, because it's free and very, very helpful when you're trying to piece this together. In addition, the Division of Workers' Compensation has we've tried to compile a lot of information on our website that other people have developed. I'm going to show you where to find our sample policies on our website, if I can switch over here. So this is our driving safety program, and we have information sort of broken down into these 4 main categories in this blue banner here to try to organize it. And you see here driver policies and safety programs. And here we have a variety of different sample policies, some from the Workforce Commission, some of them from the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Administration, National Safety Council, NIOSH. You know, there's no point in starting from scratch. A lot of these resources have already been developed, and you can modify them and customize them to your needs. Very helpful information. And a little bit farther down here, some journey management information, if that concept is not familiar to you. This particular document, Journey Management, is an oil and gas industry guide, but it's very helpful if you have people that are driving, you know, drivers that are on the road all the time. It's very helpful guidance on how to figure out how to manage those journeys, manage the trips in a way that's going to be the safest. So I encourage you to spend some time looking out here on our website or just on the internet looking for information that will help you start your program. We are certainly available to help as well. I know the National Safety Council is, if you're trying to figure out where to start, or some resources for some components that you're not sure about. So that's the conclusion of this segment of our series, and I'd like to open it up for questions at this point. If anybody has any comments or questions, type it into the chat area. I'll wait a few seconds in case we have any slow typists. Okay, so we have a question. Do you see benefit of disciplinary policies for vehicle incidents? From a safety and health management standpoint, in general, your policies or any safety policy is going to be in place, to protect your employees, to protect their coworkers, to protect your company, to protect the public, and disciplinary policies related to infractions of any company policy are certainly a way to hold employees accountable for what they're doing or not doing. I will mention that, as many of you may know, OSHA has some new reporting rules out there that went into effect on January 1st, and they do have some information in the new rule about drug testing and they don't want to dissuade employees from reporting incidents if they think they're going to get drug tested every time an incident occurs. So it would be important for you to maybe contact us. We have a OSHA consultation program to help you with any OSHA standards, or contact OSHA or talk to an attorney about what your policy should be when it comes to testing for substance abuse when an incident occurs. If there's due cause, if reasonable suspicion, then it may be just fine. There are other federal and state regulations that require certain types of employees or occupations to undergo drug testing, so those would take precedence over the OSHA regulations when it comes to their, not fully supporting drug testing for every incident. So you certainly want to make, and that goes back to what I said earlier about making sure that you're taking all the laws that apply to you into consideration when you're developing these policies. And the Workforce Commission is also very helpful when it comes to helping to answer questions about employee or company policies in terms of employment law. So hopefully that helped. Any other questions? You're welcome. Okay, well, I appreciate your time. And again, here's my contact information. If anybody wants to follow up at a later time, I'm certainly available and either try to help you out or point you in the right direction. And hopefully you will be able to join us next week, same time. We're going to be talking about qualifications of drivers, things that you should think about when you're hiring people that you know are going to be driving for you on the job, and what your minimum standards or what you're willing to accept when it comes to that particular job duty and employees that are performing them. So thank you again for your time, and I hope you have a good day.
All right. Thank you very much, Karen, for being with us today. We greatly appreciate the information you've shared with us. Hopefully this will help some employees or help employers keep employees safer. We appreciate the attendees taking a few minutes to complete a post-event survey. With that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the webinar. I do want to go ahead and share our contact information. Lisa Robinson is the program manager, and all of her contact information as well as my contact information are on our website, txdrivingconcern.org. Thank you again for joining us today.